With all of the challenges and uncertainties presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, the National Insurance Scheme has proven to be more than a contribution, but a lifeline for scores of Barbadians. On this one-on-one, we speak with the Minister in charge of Social Security as we focus on the NIS. A very good evening to you. I'm Lisa Lord, and my special guest is the Minister of Labour, Social Security and the Third Sector, the Honourable Colin Jordan. Minister, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
You're most welcome. Now, let's jump right into it as we look at the National Insurance Scheme, which was established back in 1967 as a major part of our social security system. I want you to zero in, if you could, on some of the core functions of the NIS.
The NIS was set up to provide what is called more broadly social protection for workers in Barbados. We have protection in terms of sickness. When a person is off from work, normally you work and you get paid for the time that you work. So when you're off from work, then there is that safety net that the National Insurance Scheme provides. Sickness, employment injury is also another area that the National Insurance Scheme addresses. There's the matter of severance, and when a person loses his or her job, the intervening period before that person becomes employed again is the social protection system that is the National Insurance Scheme seeks to provide protection for that person during that period of time. Unemployment benefits as well, which is a significant one, particularly in the context of the pandemic, not just for Barbados, but globally. That period of unemployment, when a person still has commitment, still has food to purchase, other bills as well, but food, utilities, the National Insurance Scheme has been set up to address those. There's a matter as well of maternity leave and the benefits associated with that. Funeral grants to assist persons whose loved ones pass and they need assistance in taking care of the funeral expenses. So there are a wide range of situations, scenarios that the National Insurance Scheme addresses, and it provides that vital protection that really, in many cases, is the difference between a person going from living a relatively normal life to being sometimes homeless, to make sure that that doesn't happen and that persons don't fall, as we say, between the cracks. The National Insurance Scheme has been set up and functions well to provide that level of protection and that level of benefits for insured persons. We've had, during the pandemic, as part of the pandemic response, we actually were able to pay to self-employed persons who were a part of the scheme but whose contributions do not cover unemployment.
Right.
We were able to give them a one-off payment to assist in the same matter of social protection, because a business person is understood to be a little bit more able to put aside for certain eventualities, but the pandemic was unforeseen, something that really was not planned for, and we were able, as a scheme and as a system of social protection, to be able to provide some measure of relief, assistance to self-employed persons as well. That was not envisaged in the setup of the system, but it became necessary because of the circumstances. So that is really how the National Insurance System works, the scheme, and the level of protection that it has been able to offer to Barbadians across the board.
Now, as you mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic obviously was an unforeseen eventuality.
Yeah.
Many persons lost their jobs. I think more than 33,000 Barbadians made claims. You could correct me if I'm wrong there.
Yes, somewhere between 30 to 40 in that range. We had about 87,000 claims, but multiple claims per some workers because of the length of time that persons would have been out of work. So about 87,000 claims, I think, the last numbers that I had, with a payment of just under $200 million in unemployment benefits. And that was a lifeline for many, many, many Barbadians. The social protection financially is one thing, but I think one of the benefits of the scheme that we really saw in the pandemic period, especially when it was at its height, the mental stress that people were under, having lost their jobs, but also trying to move around or not to move around with the specter of illness, of virus around. The kind of pressure that it put on people meant that knowing that there was that financial resource available really took some of the overall sting out of the situation. People were in their homes, and as we all know, quite a number of persons were now confined to spaces with people that they may not ordinarily have wanted to spend extended periods of time with. That in itself is its own stress, dealing with children who still needed to be schooled and not having a job, but bills are still coming in. So between maybe about 35,000 persons, I believe, would have benefited from just under $200 million of benefit in terms of unemployment during the period 2020-2021.
No, and this would have placed significant pressure under these severance and unemployment funds.
Yes.
But the NIS has several funds that were not affected, correct?
Yes.
Have the severance and unemployment funds been replenished?
They are in the process of being replenished. We are in a very interesting time. Some people tell me I overuse the word interesting. Interesting because there is have been significant claims on the funds. There have also been significant claims on funds that were not set up with that expectation. So the resources did not envisage a 1 in a 100-year event or experience or situation. We also existed at a period, and we're operating at a period where there's significant reduction in revenue across the board. So the contributions from businesses and those who remain employed significantly reduce government revenue as well. But this government has always been very clear, very certain in its undertaking that the social security system of this country will always have government as its fallback. And so with the payment of over $200 million between severance and unemployment, government understood that it had to step in to recapitalize those funds at the National Insurance. And so the request that has been made from the National Insurance Department is for about just over $160 million for recapitalization. Government committed, Cabinet made that decision some months ago, and we've already voted in Parliament the first 50 million of that 163 million, and that has already gone to the National Insurance Department. The rest of the claim, not the claim, but the rest of the amounts that have been requested for recapitalization will be paid to National Insurance over the next few financial years.
In terms of the backlog of claims, has it been cleared?
No, we are still getting claims. As a matter of fact, a number of things happened, but maybe the significant one was that at the height of Omicron, there were so many claims to be processed on the part of the Ministry of Health, because there are persons being diagnosed as COVID positive. For National Insurance to be able to process that claim form has to be submitted. So we've spent some time developing an online form that the physicians can use and the polyclinics can use to submit to National Insurance. Now, what we're working through is, because there has been a buildup of those, particularly in the height of Omicron. So those are still being processed to be sent over to national insurance. So some being done manually, but we're hoping that more and more will be done using the electronic mode. So because that will speed it up. That will speed up the processing. But a physician's signature is necessary for processing. Because while we are reaching out to people whose ordinary earnings may have stopped, and we recognize that those people need to get money and get money quickly, we also have to protect a system that is already under pressure from what could be fraudulent activity. So we have to make sure that there's doctor sign off on the claims, and that is the reason why we went the route of an electronic approach, so that a doctor didn't have to sit down and sign a form and put that one aside and then sign another one, to do it electronically. And that is beginning to work to reduce the backlog.
I'm glad you mentioned the whole element of technology, because recently NAS has suffered some software malfunctions, and this has resulted in persons getting their benefits late. What is NAS doing to strengthen their systems?
NAS we're doing a number of things. One of them, and maybe not an insignificant one, is transferring the National Insurance Department into a state-owned enterprise, because there needs to be a little bit more flexibility in being able to address the matter of not just the hardware and the software, but the persons who will be managing that system and the skill sets of those persons who will be managing the system. It needs specific focus, which is not necessarily what we will always get in the way that the public service assigns officers or transfers officers or moves officers. I say that not just pulling it out of the air, but I say that having spent myself, before becoming a political person, I spent a number of years on the National Insurance Board, representing one segment of the private sector. And it was very apparent to me that, as a matter of fact, during that period, there was a time when the system went down, and pensions was the issue at that point. Pensions were late. I don't remember what year that was, but we had significant pressure where that was concerned. But outside of the reorganizing in terms of the structure of the organization, increased emphasis is being placed on systems, making sure that systems are resilient, making sure that there is backup, maybe better backup, that we are able to, if something happens here, better able to switch to here and keep the process going. All that has to be done, and the reason why it takes a bit of time is because there are so many verification processes. The scheme is a scheme that pays out benefits. So there's the assumption that there are funds there to be paid, and there are. But once that is the case, you have to be on guard. The system and those who manage the scheme have to be on guard that the payments that are made against valid claims. So the verification process is a process that takes a bit of time to make sure, and now in an age of cyber threats, it is no longer somebody with a PhD who is able to hack. People who sometimes are considered ordinary people sometimes are able to infiltrate systems. So a lot of work is being done to make sure that both on the backup side, on the skill set side, but also on the verification side, that is kind of tight enough as we move forward. But we are paying particular attention to our computer systems, electronic systems, because, as you intimated, that is the way forward. You know, the days of paper and cutting down trees and destroying the environment just to send information, those days are now past, and COVID-19, I think, brought that into kind of stark focus. Those days are past, but there was a certain level of certainty and reliability that came with paper and a signature that you could tell if it was stamped on off actual pen did the moving from that to electronic carries with it, with that transition, some risk. And that is what we are working to make sure. I mean, Prime Minister uses the term all the time that the pursuit of perfection is a hindrance to progress. We are not looking for a perfect system, but we are looking to make sure that the system is good enough, rigorous enough to be able to combat any attempts to defraud the scheme.
Since you mentioned saving trees, I know the NAS is trying to get more persons to have their benefits lodged in their accounts versus the check system. How is that going?
It is going, I would say, reasonably well, but there's still quite a number of persons who feel comfortable only when they have the check in their hands. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that is what people have been accustomed to.
Of course. Another
significant component to that is that there are quite a number of pensioners in particular, maybe not many of the other benefits, but pensioners who will take the check to the shop, the mini-mart, supermarket, and be able, sometimes before the effective date on the check, to be able to purchase their groceries and to get the change back that then they can use to honor their other obligations. And that convenience for a segment of the population, a segment that is not trusting of a bank card, not trusting of an ATM, not trusting of using a machine in a supermarket. So as a government, we have been very clear that, we govern and we lead and we manage people. And we have to be, while we want to move forward and progress, we have to be cognizant of the sensitivities of the people who we lead. And we never are going to be in a situation where we say, forget about them, we just charging forward. This government does not operate in that way. We're never going to do that. So we keep encouraging. For new persons coming on, we put those persons onto the bank transfer system. But those who, and whether you believe it or not, there are lots of older persons or seniors for whom going to the post office and doing their business is a part of their routine that is not easy to get away from. And I'll say to you that some of the challenges of the pandemic have indicated that some of those social interactions are necessary.
Yes.
So as a government, we try to balance progress with taking into considerations some of those things that make the difference for our people, particularly those who we consider to have been the builders of the society. We're never going to throw them under the bus, forget about them. There's a respect in this government for older people, and we will take their views into consideration, even as we try to encourage them to, just let me say, modernize.
Right.
Yeah.
Point blank, should Barbadians feel comfortable with their contributions stored in the NIS, given the pressure that the scheme has?
Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. I was going to answer before you finish.
I realized.
Yes, absolutely yes. And it is because we have managed the fund over the decades in a very prudent way. Those who work at the National Insurance, in the National Insurance Department, managing the National Insurance Scheme, have over the years demonstrated that they are excellent managers of the funds of the people. So at the level of managing the funds, excellent. As a matter of fact, I could probably say here that in terms of the investment funds, and this is one of the things that surprised me when I sat on the board. So I know this before I became minister responsible for Social Security. The performance of, we have different funds managed by different people. Some of them overseas, but we have funds managed by fund managers here in Barbados at the National Insurance Department, in the National Insurance Department. There have been quite a number of years where the funds managed locally have outperformed the funds managed by overseas persons. We have capacity here to properly manage the funds. Now, that is on the management side, like I said. In terms of if the money is there, that is one of the questions that people will ask. Is the money going to be there? We've been very clear that governing is about choices. Plain and simple. Governing is about choices. We choose to make sure that our social security system, that our social protection mechanisms are always well funded, always well provided for. And that is the reason why in 2020, 2021, we not just started to recapitalize the national insurance scheme, but we also increased the vote for the welfare department. We also did the care packages. We also set up the household mitigation unit. And that's the reason why when I started, I spoke to social protection and not just the social security system. Because social security is maybe a key part, but not the only part of social protection. And I think government, by its actions, putting its money, putting taxpayers' money, putting our money where government's mouth is, demonstrates that we are very, very serious and very clear that our social protection, all the mechanisms that form part of social protection, including the maybe most important social security system, which is the national insurance scheme, will always have the funds that it needs to pay the benefits that are due to Barbadians. We have made that commitment before. I made that commitment now, and I think the general public can see that commitment based on our allocation of funding. Even when government's revenues were reduced, government still made sure that as far as possible, that nobody fell through the cracks. Our commitment was that people must be able to at least eat. Maybe not take a holiday, but at least eat. In terms of social security, the national insurance scheme, that will always be provided for.
Now, let me follow on from that. Given your confidence in the security of the scheme, during this year's estimates debate, you would have encouraged Barbadians to also invest in private pension plans and real estate if possible. So explain your reasons for that then.
Well, just let me say that my perspectives are based on my experiences. I've spent almost 30 years doing accounting. There is, on the investment side of any advice given, don't put all your eggs in one basket. There's no reason why that should apply only to business people. And that's one of the things that we've been very clear on. This government is not focused only on the haves, on the business people. On that, we started financial literacy training.
Right.
And that is going to be part of the financial literacy training as well. Retirement, planning for retirement includes not just contributing to the Social Security scheme, which is NIS in Barbados, but it also includes other avenues. So it doesn't have to be a retirement savings plan at one of the insurance companies. It could be an apartment to your house that will bring, we call those passive investments. You build the apartment, you rent it out. There are a number of people who've done that, who are not wealthy people, but who were able to build an apartment on. People who live in the houses that were built on columns, in some cases have filled in underneath over time. So you can't wait until you are close to retirement to do those things. But you fill in, you create an apartment, and you know that when you reach retirement age, well, the age that you choose to retire, or pensionable age, you're getting your pension, but you're also supplementing it with income from another source. Now, that is important, particularly when people are living longer and when people have become accustomed to a certain level, certain standard of living. There's really no magic being 66 years and 364 days and being 67. So if you are accustomed taking a staycation every year or every other year, or if you're accustomed going to the places where Bajans go to family New York or Toronto to visit relatives every some number of years, or if you're accustomed going out to eat somewhere every once in a while, there's no magic at that age that says that when you get to this point, you stop having those desires. And so if you're going to continue with a similar kind of living, because our people are living longer, and I tell people when I was younger, when I was younger, a person who, at least this is how I recall, a person who was 70 or 75 looked like an old person. I know there's a difference in perspectives because I'm getting closer to that age. But I think based on asking around and talking to people, 70 now is what used to be 50 or 40 before. So there's still going to be demands in terms of, or expectations in terms of what a person can do. And it is important in that context for persons not to rely only on what the national insurance scheme can pay as a pension, but also to be thinking about other avenues of generating income that do not call for that person to be going to work every day from 8 to 4 or 8:30 to 4:30. And so that is the reason behind my call for persons both to get involved in the scheme, national insurance scheme, by contributing, but also to look to other avenues of investment that could then allow them to have additional income so that they can continue a certain kind of a lifestyle even after they have retired.
Okay, Minister, we'll take a break here. You're watching One on One. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Caroline Gittins, a quarantine officer with the Veterinary Services Department of the Ministry of Agriculture. There's a disease called African swine fever that is affecting domestic and wild pigs worldwide. Even though it is not harmful to humans, it has the potential to wipe out every pig in Barbados. If you or your family members are traveling to Barbados, apply for a meat permit from the Veterinary Services Department. This permit tells you if it is safe to bring pork products from the country that you intend to travel to. Purchase products only in their original packaging that are clearly labeled with the inspection stamp. That means no bacon or sausages from the deli in the supermarket or from a butcher's shop. Do not cook it since the disease can survive high temperatures. When you reach Barbados, we ask that you declare all your meat products to the customs officer. We need your help in keeping Barbados safe from African swine fever.
Welcome back. Minister Jordan, we are still discussing the NIS. We know a number of entities and individuals owe contributions to the National Insurance Scheme. The Prime Minister would have announced in her budget that government will give those businesses and individuals 3 months to pay their arrears interest-free. The moratorium will be between April 1st and June 30th. And there's also plans for a payment plan for these persons. Yes.
Now, that is important because we recognize that just like government had negative impacts coming out of the pandemic, businesses in Barbados would also have had negative impacts. And when we say that we are sharing burden and sharing benefits, it is not just talk. We realize that businesses also need to be in a position to offer employment. And so we have not come down with a very heavy hand on businesses in relation, up to this point, in relation to them having not paid. So as a government, what we've decided is that we will give that moratorium. We will ask those businesses that have not paid in their national insurance contributions, and I would need to remind them that part of what they're supposed to pay in are amounts deducted from their workers. Part is their own expense, but they, in all cases, they would have deducted some funds from their workers that is not theirs. Now, the moratorium, as you said, April 1 to June 30th. During that 3-month period, we're calling on business owners, self-employed persons, anybody who is behind, who has arrears owing to the National Insurance Scheme to come forward, go to the National Insurance Office, work out a payment plan. That payment plan will focus on how over the next 2 years those payments will be made. In other words, all that is due to the National Insurance Scheme, we will get up to date within those 2 years. That plan is to be made and agreed with the National Insurance Department, and we expect that, well, in order to benefit from the waiver of interest, the plan will have to be, they will have to stick to the plan. And we are also, in terms of the arrears, the moratorium and that 2-year period covers the arrears. We expect that those organizations will stay current at the same time. So we are asking, and my background causes me to say to business people, if your income is variable, take that into consideration when crafting your payment plan. It is easy to say, well, let's divide the amount owing by 24 and pay that in 24 months. But not every business has a uniform cash flow over a year. And so if you go into national insurance next week or the week after, well, whenever April 1st is, and you work your plan out, and if you're a hotel, for example, and you believe that you should make greater payments, not just 1/24th, but a greater percentage during April and May, then include that in the payment plan. And if you think then you should drop a bit, but then increase during December, January, February, March, April next year, then factor that into the plan. There's not going to be a rigid, the National Insurance Office is not going to be rigid in saying that it has to be uniform across the year, but it has to be a plan that liquidates the amounts owing within the 2-year period.
As you would have indicated, you sat on the NIS board for a number of years before becoming minister with responsibility for it. How big of an issue is it for employers to be taking out the contributions from their employees but not paying it in?
It is a challenge, and it is a challenge that manifests itself more when there are larger challenges in the economy or challenges within the industry that the business is operating within. So, for example, during 9/11, tourism would have taken a hit and people were catching, and some would have fallen into arrears at that time. I know because I was involved in that particular sector, but I know that it also applies to businesses in other sectors. So it could be the larger economy, or it could be something sector specific. Sometimes construction, there's a lull in construction, and then there are challenges for the organizations that, in terms of their full-time employees, there's less cash flow, and sometimes business owners make what may not be the better decision, but a decision on, should I get the electricity turned off, or should I remit what is owing to national insurance? That is not the right decision to forego the national insurance to go for electricity, but it happens.
Right.
And I live in a real world, and I know that it happens, and that is the reason why I say that it has been a challenge, but as a government, understanding those challenges, we craft responses that will allow people to get out of the hole that they would have dug for themselves, or that they would have contributed to the digging of.
It may seem like a rhetorical question, but explain the importance of these funds being recovered.
That is definitely not a rhetorical question. The scheme is based on contribution levels. It is based on the study of demographic trends, the trends in terms of how the population changes, and the thresholds and the percentages are set so that as people become due for pension, they can receive their pension, that there's enough inflow to service the pension needs of those who have reached the pensionable age. And so it is vitally important, because if we make these projections and then those who are supposed to be contributing are not contributing, then we're going to have a problem.
Right.
And so it is vitally important. And there is even though government is going to make sure that people get what they're supposed to get, it means that if government, because employers are not paying in what they're supposed to pay, if government is to be true to our commitment, then the money has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And it will mean that we'll have to take it from some other program that would be of benefit to the entire country. But we're not going to allow our people to fall between the cracks. And so I appeal to, in this medium, to employers. You are part of the system. It is a system of social protection. It is not just government. It is not just workers. It is not just employers. It is a system. And for a system to survive, this is just a fact, physical and biological fact. In order for a system to survive, all the component parts of the system must be working toward to make sure that the system survives. And so it is vitally important for employers to remit the national insurance that they deduct, but also to pay the employer's portion of national insurance. And in that regard, I want to say there are some employers who are neglecting their responsibility as employers. And in cases where those who work for them are employees, are attempting to treat to them as self-employed. Now, we are not, like I said in Parliament, going to stand idly by and allow that to happen.
Can you give an example of that?
An example would be a person in construction, let's say. Now, there is a work site somewhere. You provide the hatchet, the nails, the hammers, you provide the tools. You, the company, the business, provides the tools. You say where the person has to go to work. You indicate the time that they need to be there. You tell them that this is how this is to be done. So you've established that you have control over the entire process. You provide the PPE. There are factors that are taken into consideration. And once those factors, I've mentioned some, but once those factors point to persons being employees as opposed to being subcontractors, then there is an obligation on the part of the organization to make sure that national insurance contributions are paid. That is to say that deductions are made from the wages, salaries of the persons who are working, that those deductions are remitted to the National Insurance Department, and also to pay the employer's contribution. Some employers go the route of not being faithful to the system in an effort to reduce costs.
Right.
Now, like I say, I come from the private sector. Nobody wants increased costs. So this is not to apply a burden to an organization. This is not to put an organization out of business. This is to say that an organization that engages in business is part of a society and so has a responsibility to the greater good, is really how I put it. All of us have a responsibility to the greater good. It goes for persons who are employed as domestics as well. If you employ somebody 2 or 3 days a week, this should be part of the national insurance scheme. What is going to happen, because I've heard this said, and I think it is a little bit unfortunate, persons should be disciplined enough to go and pay in. Now, our income tax system is a pay-as-you-go, right? Sorry, pay-as-you-earn, PAYE.
Mm-hmm.
That is done because none of us have the discipline really as individuals to pay as we
Earn.
earn. So that the responsibility then is placed on the organization, not to give it additional burden, but in order to make sure that in the case of tax, that government has the revenue that it needs to manage the country, but in the case of the national insurance, to make sure that when a person reaches pensionable age, that there are enough contributions in the national insurance scheme for that person to be able to get a pension and to be able to live out the rest of their lives in some kind of decent manner. So it is vitally, vitally important for all sectors and all players, all stakeholders to recognize their role and to see it more as working to the common good rather than a cost imposed on us.
Touching on the construction sector there, that was a labor issue. You are the labor minister, so I want to switch a little bit from Social Security for just a moment and look at the current unemployment figures in comparison to the height of the COVID-19 pandemic.
At the height of the pandemic, we would have gone maybe around the 20% mark. We are right now approximately around or about 11% in terms of our unemployment.
And a lot of those jobs would have come back from the bounce back of the tourism sector.
Yes, tourism. There's also quite a bit of work going on, even though a lot of our major projects haven't yet come on stream, but there's still quite a lot of construction work that is going on in the country. So there has been some bounce back, and then the extended opening hours, both in hospitality, well, in that case, I refer to like restaurants. As well as supermarkets. The extended hours, petrol stations have also caused additional persons to come back into work.
As Labour Minister, are you satisfied with the health and safety standards in most businesses? And this is outside of anything to do with COVID.
It is difficult nowadays to respond to anything outside of COVID. But I understand what you're saying. But the reason why I said that is because COVID, and this is not becoming cliche, but COVID has brought all kinds of stuff into sharp focus. So I'll give an example of the reason why I responded the way I did.
Sure.
In warehouses, as an example, a warehouse is a large room. There are products in the warehouse. There are people working in the warehouse. They're inside, outside. What we found during COVID that may have highlighted that there may have been something wrong before COVID is that there have been some spread. There was some spread of virus in those kinds of environments during COVID. Now, that suggests to us that the ventilation in the warehouse may not have been what it was supposed to be even before COVID. So I often say that too many lives have been lost in COVID for us not to learn some lessons from it. Otherwise, those lives lost would be double tragedy. And ventilation is one of those things that have come to the fore that we will be paying close attention to, even outside of a COVID-19 environment. But I will say that we also were, I think, more aware of things like PPE. Became very aware of PPE during the COVID environment. Now, there are other situations where dust, for example, could be an issue. When it is extreme, those measures were already in place. So people working with cement, for example, things that create a lot of dust, people working in quarries, those were already fine. But there are other situations where there is some dust generated, but people really probably never paid a lot of attention. The fact that the pandemic was respiratory brought that also into focus, and that is another area that we'll be looking at. So ventilation, PPE, particularly in relation to dust and that kind of thing. So there is a renewed focus. So one of the good things is that our occupational safety and health section of the Labor Department was very active throughout the pandemic period and the curfew period, because they worked with the public health authorities in the monitoring units. So they were around, they were not just patrolling, they were going to organizations, going to business places, and are now aware of some of the additional things that we need to be examining as we move forward.
You mentioned the Labor Department being active during COVID, but we know that the Labor Department is there as well to deal with complaints and issues within workplaces. What are some of the complaints that the Labor Department gets?
The Labor Department is inundated with complaints that I would say revolve, if I were to use one word, revolve around what workers see as unfairness, being unfaired, being unfairly treated in whatever manner. So it could be in terms of scheduling. So we could get a call that says the boss knows that I have a little baby, but they roster me to work all nights. Or they're not allowing me to take vacation. They're not paying me for public holidays. There are a whole number, but almost everybody will say I'm being unfair. And that is, I use the term because it is instructive. I think Barbadians generally want to be treated fairly. And part of my response to the question is an appeal to those who employ others to treat them as human beings, to treat them fairly. There are rules, because not every complaint that comes to the Labor Department is a valid complaint. So let me not give the impression that because there are lots of complaints, that there are lots of bad employers. That is not what I'm saying. Many of our employers are good employers. And I said in the parliamentary debate, there are always a few who are not. And we have to have these laws and regulations to make sure that those few do not unfair people. And so we do get complaints from persons, like I said, around those kinds of things. But we also get a lot of inquiries. I got my vacation, was it calculated correctly? A lot of this in 2020. I think some in 2021 as well. There were, because of the shutdown, some employers, in an attempt to assist their workers, told them
to take vacation.
Take the vacation so that you get the vacation pay, because national insurance would normally take a few weeks to process the claim. So rather than being without, and that was well intentioned. What it meant was that a person may have had vacation in September or October of the year before. Now there is a way to calculate vacation pay, and it assumes that you've worked 52 weeks, so that what you get as vacation pay equates to 3 or 4 of those weeks in pay. Now, if you take vacation after 4 months or 5 months, the calculation is going to reflect that. And lots of people were unsure. Some were upset over what was calculated. Now, that might have been 2020. There were some situations where the employer paid, they're not taking into consideration that less than a year was worked. So you didn't have the 52 weeks or the 12 months to do the calculation. Or some people pay what was considered a normal vacation pay. But it meant that in the following year, the adjustment had to be made. And so there was that element of confusion. And so those were some of the questions and queries that we had to address as well.
Sexual harassment in the workplace, how big of an issue is it?
We don't get significant complaints in that respect. And I think it speaks to the fact that Barbadians at the end of the day know how to behave. Sometimes we don't always behave the way we should, but we know how to behave. I remember as back in those days, I've done a number of things. And that's why I say I speak out of my experience. I used to be a director of HR as well. And I remember when that bill was being promoted and before it came into effect. And there were lots of males in workplaces who were upset, who were angry, who were saying, well, I can't talk to a woman anymore.
I can't give her a compliment.
Can't give her a compliment.
I remember that.
The act is well crafted so that if there is suspected sexual harassment, there's a process. A person doesn't just get terminated. You don't just come to the Labor Department. You go to supervisors. So there is a process, a grievance procedure almost, that allows the alleged situation to be put on the table and allows the alleged perpetrator or the perpetrator to be spoken to, and those matters can be addressed. And I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that if there are significant numbers, they're being dealt with at the workplace level. But we've not had significant numbers at the Labor Department.
My final question to you. As Labor Minister, what is your biggest concern?
My biggest concern is still social security. Social protection generally, social security, and the need for employers to treat workers who are really employees as employees. A corresponding concern would have to do with what we, in the ILO context, talk about when we speak to formality and informality. So that developing countries, Barbados included, we have large informal sectors. So that coconut vendors, I mean, these are the terms we use here, braiders, that's the informal sector. I know increasingly what we refer to as the gig economy, those who are involved in the gig economy, who do not want to work for anybody for 20 years, they provide their services here, there, informal sector. But we are, and I spoke to the chair of NIS just about 2-3 days ago, we have to intensify our efforts not to make people who want to be self-employed into employees. That is not what we want to do. If you are genuinely self-employed and you want to be self-employed, then you be self-employed. But come into the formal sector, meaning be part of the social security scheme. And that is something that we have the jingle, more than the contribution. It's our lifeline. It's been running for years. It's going to continue running because we have to keep that up front in the minds of people. There may come a time in the pandemic when the shutdown happened, there were lots of persons who had not contributed to the scheme, were not part of the system. Everybody needs to be a part of the system. Why catch you in pass you? It may not be another pandemic, but it could be something else. And the need for that protection is always there. I've seen in too many situations, again, when I was on the board of the National Insurance Department, people applying for benefits, but they haven't made enough contributions. And so the matter of the contributions, making the contributions, being a part of that formal system is something that we are going to be pushing, and it is a concern of mine, because I do not believe that any Barbadian at 67 should be out in the cold, so to speak. You know, they should be provided for. But all of us have a role to play in making sure that we are provided for. The only way that you're not going to need that provision is if you die before retirement age. If you intend to live to, as we say, a ripe old age, then become a part of the scheme. And even if you don't intend to, you're going to have children, you're going to have other people around you who need to be beneficiaries. We need to be part of the system.
That's a fantastic point on which we can end. Minister, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for the opportunity to share.
You're most welcome. That was the Minister of Labour, Social Security and the Third Sector, the Honourable Colin Jordan. I am Lisa Lord. This was One on One. Thank you so much for watching.